Thank you so much, Shay, for that introduction. And I would like to add here regards. I would like to add here regards association with IRIS. You can associate with IRIS in the form of a volunteer, a mentor, or a collaborator. You can volunteer for the IRIS National Fair. You can you can volunteer as a mentor for students who are participating in IRIS. And you can also collaborate with IRIS by offering your labs, your institutions, etc., for students who wish to utilize the facilities. If you would like to collaborate with IRIS, please do get in touch with us. And do let us know. We are absolutely open to anybody who would like to participate through collaboration in IRIS. And now, without further ado, we would like to welcome Dr. Asim M. Auty. Dr. Auty is a senior training associate in Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, ISNA, and has been teaching science for over a decade. Dr. Auty received the National Academy's Education Fellowship in Life Sciences 2014, the National Academies USA. His research interests include microbial diversity, metagenomics, and environmental biology. Dr. Auty has a keen interest in developing and implementing various pedagogical tools centered on active learning classrooms for the class 12 and beyond level. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Auty, and thank you so much for giving up your time over a weekend to help us with this webinar. We are so glad that you could join us this evening, and we look forward to a wonderful interaction with all our participants. Over to you, Dr. Auty. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm audible, right?
Yes, you are.
Yes, you're audible.
You are.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I would now just share my screen. Okay. So, dear participants, again, let me also welcome you for this webinar. Especially, I feel it's very really great of you that you could in these particular times where you're not able to go to school, not meet your friends and teachers, you're still able to sort of encourage yourselves, and your teachers are also with you to go ahead and do perhaps a bit of research and projects through IRIS also. So great. This is something that I also look forward to in the coming year, what kind of projects you will do and how you will go about it. So let me start with the topic. I understand that there will be junior and senior category participants and teachers here. So it is possible that some of the things may be to you and so on, but please write your comments, questions. At the end, I'll be very happy to take most of these and then try to explain them. So to begin with, these are really big areas of science, and research has been going on in these fields for a long time, and this will continue even more. So I'll try to sort of give you a taste of what things are happening in recent times with respect to these fields, and also perhaps talk about few examples, and we can discuss few cases where you can find these cases and examples interesting to do your projects and so on. So first of all, let me talk about microbiology. These are the main areas that you know which are present here. I'll just quickly talk about what these things are in very simple terms. So the first category is antimicrobial and antibiotics. Basically, the tools that we have developed as humans using or taking clues from bacteria, fungi, and even some plants to basically kill bacteria and fungi, to control them and so on. So this is a broad description of this particular subcategory. Then applied microbiology, where we use different microorganisms to develop new products, use their byproducts overall, so that we can find some applications in human, plant, and animal health related issues. Uh, the few examples you perhaps already might be gathering what kind of examples these applied microbiology cases have. Then bacteriology, it's again a very huge field where people normally study all the fundamental things about bacteria themselves and their processes. Next is environmental microbiology, which is a relatively new field where we talk about microbial diversity and microbial processes that happen on a larger scale in different natural resources around us and so on. So we talk about the basic process that happen, and also talk about how we can use these processes further in different applications. And then it's microbial genetics, where most of the research goes on about genes and now recent genomes of microbes and its potential applications currently. Because we have reached to a particular stage where we now have a lot of data about microbial genes and genomes, and this is a time where we have started applying it. And last category is virology, which is currently a million, or they also say $1 billion topic, especially viruses in the COVID pandemic situation. I'll talk about that also. So these are the, sorry. So these are the categories under different theme, which is computational biology and bioinformatics. Again, it's a huge field where in recent times, in the last couple of decades, a lot of development has happened, and there are many research institutes and labs who work extensively on these topics. So I just again briefly talk about what these particular fields are. So computational biology, computational biomodeling is very basically oversimplifying things. It's basically modeling biological processes in silico, that is using computers, computational mechanisms, statistics, and related things. Mathematics, very important. Second category is computational epidemiology, which is again a very important topic to think about and discuss, and you must be hearing about it, especially in the pandemic era, where we use computational methods, mathematics, etc., to study spread of diseases, what risks are involved, what we understand about these diseases and how they spread, and then how can we control it. Third is also very big field and very close to my heart also, which is computational evolutionary biology, where we use mathematical modeling, simulations, and understanding the data and analyzing the data so that we understand evolutionary processes. And there are also very interesting and related things around that. So I'll talk about that in the course of my presentation. Fourth is computational neurosciences. It's a very new field, and this, as I'll explain later, is now possible to do computational analysis of our brain, of our nervous system, because we have that processing capacity with us. So it deals with everything about brain and our nervous system, and try to model it. Next is computational pharmacology, which talks about drugs, its targets, their interactions, etc., through computational approach using some mathematics and modeling and visual aspects of it. And last is genomics. So again, this is a also very huge topic which talks about everything about the entire complement of heredity that we talk about, and how structure and function of genomes are related and how can we apply them and so on. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is these are some subcategories, and uh, uh, very interesting in this particular topic that Iris asked me to talk about is very interdisciplinary. So what I'm going to do is I'll talk about uh, these things individually, but also I'll give you some references that how they are connected together. And I'll request you also think about these things as interdisciplinary, something that you have that you can think about not as one topic, but how it is connected to other topics within microbiology that I mentioned, as well as bioinformatics and computational biology. So let me start with explaining about antimicrobials and antibiotics that we have now, and what has been happening and what can be done, what can be some interesting questions and topics that you can think about. So fundamentally, classically, the field talks about different mechanisms of antimicrobial activity. Very simply, the difference between antimicrobial and antibiotic is the source. So antimicrobials can be any compounds that are coming from bacteria, fungi, or even plants, in some cases, animals, in traditional knowledge also, uh, which are used to limit growth to kill bacteria and fungi. Where antibiotics are specifically those which come from bacteria and fungi, which are used against them. You already know, and perhaps all of you must have taken some prescribed antibiotics at some point of time. So the thing is, this is relatively recent field. I know you must have heard about how antibiotics were discovered by Fleming and so on. But you see, if you think about the whole course of biology and the whole course of microbiology that we understand, uh, in that whole history, this is a very short, very recent part in which we have discovered antibiotics and we have used them extensively. So this is something can be of your interest, where you think about new antimicrobials that you can extract, that you can use and study how they particularly affect different microorganisms. Uh, this is also a field where scientists work on modifying existing molecules. That means making derivatives out of existing molecules. Now, one reason is, as you will also understand, newer diseases and newer pathogens are coming up, and it requires obviously newer tools, defensive tools that we have to generate and think about. So, in Indian traditional knowledge and some other tribal traditional knowledge outside India, people have been using antimicrobials and antibiotics, perhaps not really understanding what that was, but certainly using it in the traditional medicine, where these molecules were useful in controlling diseases. And recently, we have started using our traditional knowledge to uh, try to find newer applications of these molecules to Ayurveda, naturopathy, and so on. So this is something very interesting, and you can think about doing some finding new methods to improve the properties of these molecules. Uh, like I was saying, since now for some time we have been using extensively these antimicrobials, and that has helped us overall humanity to fight many diseases and increase our survival and so on. But parallelly, we have also faced, now we are also facing variety of species becoming resistant to these antimicrobials and antibiotics. A very common example is MRSA, that is methicillin resistant Streptococcus aureus, which is uh, thought to be a different, initially easy to fight uh, pathogen, but now there are strains of the species which we now know, and in many other species also, that are not really susceptible to existing antimicrobials. And uh, many researchers are studying the reasons behind why this is happening, and what kind of strategies can be applied, what kind of new antibiotics can be developed to fight these particular multi-drug resistant strains. I think this kind of research is very common also in all major research institutes. So this is something that you can think about, and something that you can also work in your own schools and colleges with minimal resources also. What is required is a thorough knowledge of the type of antibiotics that we can develop, and for that certainly researchers can help in developing that. Uh, Again, recently, something, because we have not extensively studied some other sources for as antimicrobial agents other than bacteria, fungi, and to some extent plants. Researchers have started looking for new molecules that can act as antibiotics and as antimicrobials. For example, bacterial toxins. Bacterial toxins is a part of their defense mechanism, like any other antibiotic that bacteria or fungi produce. This is a new field where we can think about trying to find new molecules that are toxic in nature but can be transformed into potential antibiotics. This has given rise to a new field which is called as peptidomimetics, where you are mimicking the properties, the structures, and obviously the functions of different peptides, small protein molecules, which can be very good source potential antibiotics. So in this case, searching for these possible peptides is a very interesting and upcoming area in antimicrobials and antibiotics. Uh, uh, so you can imagine perhaps this happens in a wet lab, and where you're working with n number of sources from where you isolate n number of bacteria and then try to find out whether they have these potential antibiotics. That is one way of doing that through wet lab. But you can also do this using computational methods, and I'll explain you in a bit how that can be done in terms of modeling. Uh, uh, so people are, like I said, searching for novel molecules, and not just that, they are also now searching for novel targets. So you can imagine a weapon like antibiotic is designed against a particular process to inhibit particular process in bacteria, either synthesis of new DNA or RNA or proteins, or synthesis of their cellular structure like cell wall and so on. And people are now also looking at bacteriophages, basically those viruses which are known to infect bacteria. So people are also now trying to search for different mechanisms that these bacteriophages use to take control of bacteria species and their growth and so on. So whether that can be a source of finding out new molecules that could be used as antibiotics is another very important area. One more is trying to sort of design methods or try to invent new tools and techniques that could help us search for new and novel molecules and targets. So very recently, one lab in ICER as well as a few other labs are able to sort of design new methods called as assay, which is quantitative, qualitative both, to find out, to screen from thousands of different strains of bacteria, which strain is producing a novel or unique kind of molecule, and how can we isolate that from a collection of these strains and use it further and so on. So bioluminescence screening assay is very nice and very interesting one, where if for example a new molecule is being produced, it could be detected with the help of some genetically engineered vectors and methods where we can try and actually visualize that some of these species, in a growth medium, you can actually see them glowing because they are producing something new that their other cousins and other species are not able to. So thinking of ideas and designing of these assets is also very important in this particular subcategory, and that's why I have mentioned it here. Uh, uh, when I talk about antibiotics or I talk about bacteria and in the microbiology, I'm also immediately talking about what are these applications, right? So here I'm actually I'll focus on specific applications only and not like a basic research part of microbiology, where probiotics, all of you know, right? So this is a very famous, a very well-known application of using bacteria in our as health product in our own health and our own fitness and so on. So the basic idea of probiotics comes from that after we realize that bacteria are a part of our physiology, our whole system, right? Where we harbor bacteria in our intestine and everywhere. And some of them are harmful, but some of them are also very useful. And can we actually exploit that? And from there it comes. Second aspect in applied microbiology is you're also nowadays aware of that, which is um, production of antibiotics, yes, but also vaccines and medical useful enzymes that can be used, extracted, produced to take care of some applications. So these enzymes can be used anywhere in your household detergent that you get, or in case of treatment of wounds or treatments of, let's say, lactose intolerance and so on. So searching for these new molecules, these species that could produce different enzymes and products is something that you can think about as a project to do and so on. Not just in terms of healthcare products and so on, in basic fundamental research and biotechnology also, these bacterial products and fungal products are useful, like enzymes and proteins. You by this time must have heard about Taq polymerase, right? So which comes from a microbial species, specifically archaeal species, which is an enzyme that could replicate DNA and be still stable at higher temperatures and so on. This is something that you can think about what kind of problems and limitations current methods are having, and then can you think about new ideas or sources from where you can get these products and so on. One of such products which is nowadays produced in India a lot as well as abroad, it's called as biosurfactant. Surfactant is the agent that uh, uh, work on surface things and reducing it and so on. So this is a very useful product. The problem of classical products and traditional products is they are all chemical based, so they pollute the environment and they are not really easy to manufacture without polluting the environment and so on. So biosurfactant is something that we recently find out that bacteria and fungi produce a lot. They use it for a number of uses. They use it as a defense. They use it to find out what is going on around them. They use it to degrade or sort of emulsify certain certain nutrients outside their body, so they can degrade it a bit outside and then take it in and so on. And as the research is progressing, we are realizing there are a lot of species, not in far corners of the world, but around us, where these biosurfactant producing bacteria can be found. So finding them, producing or trying to define or trying to design some methods for its purifying the molecule, producing it and applying it in different applications is something that you can think about. Another specific point I'm highlighting here is use of extremozymes. So extremozymes is a very common word used. Technically, these are enzymes which are produced by extremophiles. Extremophiles are those organisms that live in extreme environments, like hot sulfur springs or in high temperature dry deserts, the Arctic basins, n number of such extreme environments where we don't expect any life to thrive, but we have found mainly archaeal species living there. So Taq polymerase is an example of an enzyme that we have extracted from Thermus aquaticus. So finding such new enzymes and other metabolites is also a very good developing field in recent applied microbiology category. One example I'm putting here is called as archaeorhodopsin. So rhodopsin, you perhaps heard about a pigment molecule or a protein that is useful, which reacts to light, photo energy, and so on. So recent studies have focused on using this particular molecule to be used as a small protein or a bunch of collection of proteins where they can respond to light, photic energy, and convert into chemical energy. So uh, chemical energy. So scientists are using now, trying to find ways to incorporate this and make artificial retina. Yeah, so I think Rishi Bhandari is requesting for remote control. Sorry, Rishi, I can't do that. So let us go ahead. Uh, right. So this is just an example where we are using microbial products to think about something futuristic, where we are developing some products that are sort of combination of these things. I mentioned about wound healing and the applications also, right? So research is going on, and we are trying to find specific processes and reasons why bacteria infect particular wound, why particular bacteria infect particular wound, and out of that, which one are useful and which one are really harmful. Uh, by default, we'll think about wound infection with bacterial species really, really dangerous. It is most of the time. But we have realized, especially because the research has gone ahead, that there are type of species that are critical to trigger wound healing and can be used in treatments and so on. So it can be deep wounds, cut wounds, or it can be burn wounds and so on. So studies on biofilms as a larger topic. Biofilms is a thin film which is produced by bacteria on a plane, where they interact with each other. They produce lots of exopolysaccharides that can be very useful for all. So studying biofilms is a very, very interesting topic nowadays. You can think about that. There are many applications in bacterial therapeutics also. We have now found species that produce different peptides and products which can have potential applications in oncolytic processes, that is trying to restrict or kill cancerous growth and cancerous cells and so on. So this is also a very interesting topic. While I'm sharing these some classical, some modern methods and developments, I realize it's not possible for all of you to work with these perhaps cutting edge, high end kind of research which is going on. You may not have enough resources to do that. Right, from purchasing different chemicals and instruments and so on, which is I completely understand. But the next topic, which is the computational biology topic, the bioinformatics topic, this is something that you can still do. You can still pursue your interests in these fields, but not perhaps in vitro, but in silico. So keep this in mind, and like I said, try to think about how can you use these fields together overall. One more application is bioremediation of natural resources, something that I'll talk about later in environmental microbiology. What do you think about that? Bioremediation basically is remediating, getting the natural resource ecosystems, water bodies, etc., which are completely polluted and now not really thriving, and taking them back to their original state is using biological agents, especially bacteria and combination of bacteria and fungi, etc., is basically bioremediation. I'll talk about that briefly. And the last topic that I would like to share here is plant growth promotion. PGP is a short form commonly used. So we have found, not recently, but we have known for quite many years that bacteria and fungi both are known to interact with plants, and plants are known to interact with them. And there can be different kinds of relationships. One you might already know, the root nodule rhizobium relationship with legume plants. But we have now realized there are so many other interactions and so many other species that are known to work with plants, or we think that they work with plants. So this is something that you can think about as a possible area or potential project, where you can take any plant which is around you, right? For example, neem tree. We have known neem as a very important medicinal plant. Here you can think about, is it only neem that provides the medical properties, or it's a combination of neem and perhaps an endophytic, that is an organism living inside another organism, endophytic bacteria or fungi. Sometime back I tried doing that, and I did not pursue it, but this is something that you can think about. You can also think about free living bacteria, those bacteria which are not inside plants, but they are around plants, they are around roots, and what kind of interaction they have with plants, and such kind of research is very much in demand nowadays. Next major category is bacteriology. As I said, it's study of bacteria, everything about bacteria. So classically and traditionally, it is the microbial physiology, the metabolic process that happens, genes and their expression, their control. So it's a vast field, and you can think about some problem that you have in mind. So, for example, why these bacteria use particular XYZ nutrients, and why not ABC nutrients? So there is a big evolutionary process behind that, and try to find out some reasons why this could be happening. You can think about why certain bacteria grow in certain conditions and not in other conditions. You can think about same bacteria growing in one condition produce these metabolites that you can assay. But if a condition is changed, for example, from 37 degrees in which the bacterium grows, you change it to 40 degrees. So then you will perhaps find a completely different set of metabolites being produced. So these are some issues and problems you can think about, and try to find perhaps the root source, the root cause of these things. That is a traditional bacteriological approach. The modern bacteriological approach is using genomics and bioinformatics. Again, very good overlap between microbiology and informatics. So with new technology, with new methods, with extensive availability of resources and instruments, we are now able to actually talk about not just one species, but a community of bacteria that are present in your gut or your skin, or urogenital systems. These are some examples. So basically, the keyword here is microbiome, which is a collection of genome of all bacteria or all species that you find around you, right? So this is something which is a major jump that happened in 1980s and 2000. You know, the Human Genome Project, right? So similar technology now has been used to talk about the whole connection of bacteria which are present in gut and what they do. We have recently found out there is a connection between the gut and the way you think. The gut and the microbial flora of the gut is now sort of known to be influencing your thoughts. So this is something that you can think about, which bacteria, how they control, and so on. Skin microbiome is also very important. It is important overall, just to understand what kind of bacteria live on our skin, how they interact, how they change, why some people living in same conditions don't get infections, and some people get with pathogens that are not present otherwise. Urogenetic microbiology also very important upcoming field overall. There are a lot of studies going on with respect to, so you know, right, from parents, from mother, father, etc. So we get our genes from them, but is it only that? Do we get something more? So now we have realized that from mother to the child, to the baby, there is transfer of bacteria that are present on and inside the mother. and then how that influences the baby, and later in the adult stage, what kind of diseases and disorders that particular baby can be prone to based on what kind of combination of bacteria they get from their mother and so on. This is also a very interesting field, so you can think about that. The third field is bacterial immune system, and yes, I mean bacterial immune system. Like we have our immune system, bacteria also have their immune system. It's obviously a bit different than what we have, but this is something that we researchers find very interesting to find out. One is just to understand how bacteria defend themselves, how bacteria can grow and survive in such a variety of conditions, and what are the reasons behind that in terms of their defense. And second is whether we can mimic that, whether we can use these different systems, which is combination of proteins and signaling and control of DNA and protein expression and so on. So there are many applications of that. I'll talk about a couple of applications of this, where from bacterial immune system we have got this. Quorum sensing is also a very interesting topic nowadays. Quorum sensing basically means trying to understand the communication, the chemical communication between bacteria. So I talked about biofilm, right? So biofilm is something that a bacterial colony forms. If it's a colony, then there must be some interaction. So the question that somebody had in mind was, do bacteria have language? How they communicate with each other? How do they know where is the food? How do they know where is not the food? How do they know what to avoid? Where is danger? So I'm sort of oversimplifying these researches, but I hope this will be useful for you to just start thinking about that. So quorum sensing is also a very important field nowadays, where we realize there is bacterial communication going on between species, not just interspecies but intraspecies also between two different species. So what are these molecules? How do they communicate? Can we use that communication to control bacterial growth? Can we use that communication to enhance bacterial growth? Because some are good bacteria and we want them to grow and give us products and so on. So this is something, a combination of chemistry and biology. So you talk about chemical molecules, but in biological systems. Like I said before, bacteriology also involves inventing and finding out new ways, new tools, etc. That could help not just microbiologists who study bacteria and microorganisms, but others also. Like for example, you think about a bacterial system that is useful in controlling a particular viral infection. Now, can we use these products and can we think about some applications of these systems so that it can be useful for human or plant benefits on? So I have quoted here two examples of such tools and assays. One is the reporting assay. Reporting assays is something that we use bacterial plasmids. Plasmids are extra chromosomal DNA. So bacteria have their genome, but they also have a different set of DNA containing some few genes which are useful for n number of applications. So this is something, so that is something, a different storage of information that they have than their genome, which mainly controls day-to-day activities. So for example, plasmids, which are extrachromosomal DNA, contains many genes for resistant to different antibiotics. So Pseudomonas species, a bacterial species, which is very well known, very well studied for its property to degrade n number of antibiotics and xenobiotics also. Xenobiotics are those compounds which are not naturally produced, which are most of the times man-made, which are not found naturally. So we can use these plasmids as vehicles, vectors, where we can put a gene of interest inside the vector, inside the plasmid, and that can be integrated into some other organism. So now, if that plasmid is active and it is performing something inside the other organism, other bacteria, or mouse, etc., model organisms, then uh, these plasmids will also express some genes that will report to you, that will show you something is happening here. So that reporting can be fluorescence, that reporting can be formation of certain chemical compounds, that reporting can be formation of certain pigments, etc. So we also now develop systems where we use bacterial plasmids and bacterial vehicles to transform mammals, right? And those mammals can be scanned through various fluorescent scanning systems. And you can see exactly where that gene is getting expressed inside the body without actually dissecting or killing the animal. So that is one. Second is editing. Editing is basically, I talked about bacterial immune system, right? One major pathogen for bacteria is bacteriophage, viruses, right? So how do bacteria control viruses? One major defense system that we have known now for quite some time is use of endonucleases. Nucleases are enzymes uh, which destroy DNA, right? Nuclease. So there are typical endonucleases present in bacteria that can recognize foreign alien DNA that is coming out from outside the bacteria and targeting that and cutting that. So we have been using those enzymes to sort of edit our genomes, our genome in the sense the genome of our interest. Uh, for example, we use these enzymes to cut particular gene from a particular genome and then paste it somewhere else. We can use it to sort of find out how many different alleles or copies are present in a particular genome and so on. So basically what you're doing is editing. You're sort of cutting and pasting things. And how are you cutting and pasting things is through these enzymes that we get from bacteria. So this is only possible when you talk about bacteriology, basic study of bacteria, and then thinking about applications. So you can think about possible other applications. For that, it is very important for you to read a few research articles, few books that talk about some basic information so that you get an idea. Um, Also applying this basic knowledge of bacteria. So we can use bacteria as a model system to study a number of other topics. For example, evolution. So evolution normally happens over a huge period of time. Right? For us to actually see evolution, it is not possible because it takes a lot of time. It's on its own and so on. But then if you want to study evolution in a given span of time, in lesser span of time, we can use bacterial model systems because they grow really fast. So if they grow really fast, if mutations are happening, if they are accumulating, if natural selection is happening, then you can actually see that within a period of few days and perhaps few months. So to study evolution on bacteria as model system has been developed a lot, and there are quite a lot of problems that are still being answered. So this is something you can think about to study ecosystems, to study competition between uh, different organisms. So what we are doing is we are using bacteria as models, so which are not true systems, right? These are models, these are representations of real systems. But we are using them, we are trying to find their interaction within them. We are trying to study that so that we can think about what must be happening there in real world, in real life, in the ecosystem and so on. So diseases is quite straightforward. We have used a lot of bacteria species to know about and study diseases. Genetic analysis is also something that different bacterial species have helped us to understand how genes function, how they get expressed, how they are controlled. And we then realize that quite similar kind of systems are also there in some other organisms. And aging also, so something that is relatively recent but of very big interest. So bacterial model systems have also been used to study aging. Aging is basically, so you can think about when we age, we can see what is happening. So we are getting old, the hair are getting white, we can wrinkle skin and so on. But do you think bacteria also can age? But because you see, so one bacterium divides into two daughter cells, so there is no parent, right? So whenever it divides, there is generation of new daughter cells, so newborns. So we realize that this is not the case in bacteria also. As the number of daughter cells go on, as the days go on, uh, the different functions of a particular cell also reduces, like we see in aging. Right? Bacterial system have also been now studied to think about aging overall. So that is one. Uh, and certainly, which is ongoing, you can think about is exploring new species, new diversity, new community of bacteria, and also their interactions as a subject for your projects. The environmental microbiology, one major classical way of studying it is microbial diversity. What kind of different species and what kind of different interactions, what kind of different roles they play in the environment around us. Uh, and this has been possible recently at a really large scale because of the sequencing techniques and methods that have improved a lot. And we no longer require a cell to get the DNA. We can get DNA directly from environmental samples and see what kind of community that is. So this is something you can think about uh, in terms of studying microbial diversity and what kind of diversity might be present in a pond around you, or even in extreme temperatures, extreme weathers, or even inside your home. I'll talk about that a bit. So forest and aquatic microbiomes are also now very important part of climate change studies, because their role in different processes, different natural cycles is now we have realized is very important. And trying to find out exactly their role, how do they interact, and what kind of diversity is present in these particular natural resources is something that people are interested in, and you can also think about. You need not actually be, I mean, you may not actually be able to study the whole microbiome of a particular system, but at least you can think about some projects where the data is available and you are using that data to analyze particular thing, which can happen in the modeling and bioinformatics part, which I explained. Third, which is also related to this particular point, is bacteria and so blue-green bacteria and algae are now being thought about as autotrophic biorefineries. So autotrophic is they prepare their own food through sunlight. So knowing that, and biorefineries is basically you are refining, you are improving the quality of air, water, etc. So these are biorefineries. So especially in terms of global carbon dioxide management, we are thinking of using and producing these autotrophs and trying to find out whether they can help in managing carbon dioxide levels and so on. Like I said, bioremediation is a very important topic under environmental microbiology, and that particular uh, just and that uh, particular resources and particular set of bacteria can be used to do that. For example, I worked on degradation of petroleum hydrocarbons that contaminate soil and water, and whether we can use different bacterial species to degrade that air and make sure the environment is clean. And I could find really good important species that could do that. And not just that, I also use metagenomics. Genomics is part of it, where I studied the diversity. And I also find out the diverse bacteria that are present in that particular system are not only able to degrade this particular hydrocarbons, petroleum products, but they are also useful for plants. So this is something that you can think about. You perhaps at some level you'll start with one problem and you go ahead, but later you realize this problem has this answer, but also another answer for another problem. So this is something that can happen to you also. Another major field is talking about novel species of bacteria from the Anarchia for xenobiotic degradation, which is a major pollution problem around us. Degradation of plastics or disease or major polyaromatic hydrocarbons which are contaminating, and there are no natural system, natural processes, metabolic processes that would degrade that. So for doing that, trying to find out or trying to see whether you can utilize different species or combination of species to do that at lab scale, at lab level, is something that you can think about. Biosensor technology is also now improving, meaning it's a combination of electronics and electric systems with biological molecules, either live cells or some proteins and enzymes within the cells, which are very sensitive to different compounds in the environment. So they sense. So these are the cells called as biosensors. So they sense particular so they sense particular compound and chemical in the environment, and that can help you detect things beforehand, trying to perhaps reduce disaster that can happen because of that. Different species of fungi, especially, and then bacteria, are now also been used as biocontrolling agents, biopesticides, bioinsecticides. Right? So you can think about trying to identify different species which are available, which can be used to control different pests, control different harmful diseases on plants as well as animals. So again, these are some things that certainly you can think about and do in your schools and with help of some research labs and so on. And very importantly, especially under environmental microbiology, uh, researchers are trying to develop methods and tools and strategies to make sure industrial processes are now having some alternative practices that could help reduce contamination and pollution of the environment. So here you can think about different processes and natural process that happens with the help of bacteria and fungi in the environment around us, and whether you can transform, modify, design some methods, whether you use them in your labs to control different applications and products manufacturing, etc., as industrial alternatives. And like I said, so something that you can think about the microbial community indoors, in your house, in your room, in your cupboard. This is something obviously interesting, and this something can be exciting. But there are real world applications of this. What kind of community we live in, microbial community? What kind of community people in Western Ghat live versus what kind of community people in Northern Ghats live? You see, there are many factors around us that influence this microbial community, including us and our practices. So, what can be done? One, to study this community indoors, and then what can be done to make sure a good community is built indoors, especially in these days where we are most of the times in our homes and not going outside and not getting exposed to other things. And then microbial genetics. Again, this is a very huge field, and it contains a number of offshoots that you may hear and listen about under different names and different topics. Try to cover it. I try to give a good overview of this. So it basically involves basic fundamental understanding of genes and nowadays genomes. So which genes, why genes, how genes, what are their functions, what are their products, and so on. Because you can imagine this is very useful. So far, based on the category that I have explained, understanding this particular connection between the gene and the product becomes very useful. So DNA technology, or nowadays the recombinant DNA technology, have actually started from bacteria, studying bacteria themselves, and now we use for a number of things. It has reached to humans also, where we do DNA medicine, gene medicine, etc. And it is obviously connected to omics. So omics is, so we can cover genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, etc. So all these are terms where we want much more understanding of ourselves. These are the terms which deal with different techniques, methods, tools, data, so that we understand ourselves, how we live, what are the things happening inside us, and so on. But to start with, all this actually is studied and done in bacteria, different bacteria species, because you can imagine it's easy to work with, easy to manipulate, and easy to study overall. So you can think about possible techniques, possible development, and new addition to different technology that can be developed or can be used using DNA technology in bacteria. Genetic engineering is something that I also talked about. I talked about endonucleases, right? So the latest editing method that we have is called as CRISPR-Cas, so which is also another part of basically bacterial immune system. But we use those proteins and its function outside the cell, where these particular set of proteins and RNA together can identify different regions inside of the genome, and cut particular areas very specifically based on what we want it to. So these are like small bio machines that can go inside and do the cutting part, and then engineer new genes and combinations, etc. And it has any number of applications. So this is something which is very recent, and research labs are working on it overall. So you can think about what possible applications these can have and try to incorporate that in your projects. Uh, Thinking about genetics, genes is parallel to thinking about biomarkers. Can we identify different genes that are connected to a particular phenotype or a particular expression or a particular process? Can we identify what is exactly happening in a particular phenotype? So, for example, you see a mouse getting really fat, a mouse getting really thin. So, what is exactly happening at gene level? So, this is something we want to study ultimately in every species, for example. So, in bacteria, you can identify some biomarkers. You can extrapolate to some other species also whether these biomarkers are present or not. And then you can study another species, what you can see in bacteria and whether that is happening or not. So these become very important, not just for basic science or basic research, but also as application, especially for diseases, etc. So can we identify similar genes which are present in bacteria and present in humans, which can act as biomarkers for a particular disease to come in future and so on. Microbial genetics is also about trying to find out new ways to characterize bacteria, to know more about bacterial features and properties, to perhaps better identify them and then classify them into different species so that we can study them better and so on. So developing new methods for characterizing bacteria is also a very good field and something that you can think about. And going in detail of particular gene and its expression is also something that researchers do and are really interested in. How genes are controlled, how they are regulated, what are the external factors that actually control the internal genes, etc. So bacterial system using model systems and their expression regulation is something that is also going on and also of very interest. And coming to virology, so I'll not talk about COVID, but I'll generally talk about virus. So virology basically is everything from pathogenesis, that is production and establishment of a disease, to its control. The main agent here is basically viruses, and there are so many viruses that we have yet to discover also. But very important point, very important key feature of viruses is that they all are pathogens. They all are parasites, so they require living cell to grow and divide. Right? Um, so how do they do that? What is the basic uh, pathway and process? How do viruses know? How do they catch hold of their host? How do they go inside? How do they replicate inside? How do they make sure in some cases that cell is not dead, but they are multiplying inside? In some cases, they decide cell will die and they will come out and infect other cells, and so on. So for this virome, like bacterial genome, so virus genome is also now getting studied, and this is where omics is very important. Bioinformatics is very important. So trying to find new viruses and trying to find new variants in viruses, and then trying to find what is their genetic makeup, genetic complement overall, and whether we can use that information to control viruses is something very important. Something that we are all now hearing about is zoonosis, is jumping of viruses from a different species, a mammal or sometimes a bird, like a bird flu, to mammals, from pigs to humans, from bats to humans, and so on. So this is also this is not at all a new field. This has been happening for quite a few years, but now because of um, COVID-19 pandemic, new interest is generated in this, and researchers are trying to find out what are the reasons, what are the mechanisms that one virus can suddenly jump from one species to another species, which they normally don't do, right? But what are the conditions in which it happens and why it happens, and then in which viruses this is they are more prone to do that, which viruses will not do that unless very extreme conditions happen and so on. So this is a very important field in virology. We try to think about viruses as our pathogens, but they also infect plants, especially crop plants, and controlling viruses in agriculture is also a very important field under virology. Interestingly, one of the first viruses that researchers could isolate and study is tobacco mosaic virus. Virus is used to infect tobacco plants and create a mosaic pattern on the leaf. So viruses in agriculture is also a major field in which, especially for our country, which is more dependent on agriculture and so on. So this is a field where something can be done. Research is very important. Uh, and something like I call viruses teachers, right? So meaning viruses, as I said, can control the whole cell with the remote control, right? So how do they do that? What are the key nodes and key network biological processes that they control and how they control inside the cell? If we know that, then we also know how to control other cells as well as how to control viruses. So this is something you can think about. And with the current SARS-CoV-2 thing, this will be something that people will be interested to know and to get more ideas from you through projects. So you can think about that. So this was about mainly microbiology, and as I said, you can think about it and try to connect with me in the following aspects of computational biology and bioinformatics. Let me go forward. This. So the first subcategory that we have is computational biomodeling. Like I've been saying, this is also a very big field and has different branches coming out of it. But basically, in simple language, is modeling in vivo biological processes in silico. So it mainly involves modeling, developing, simulating biological systems using mathematics, statistics, computer science, etc. together, so that we can work on it. We can manipulate things easily. We can study things easily. We can do things which are really difficult to do in labs. We can do things that we can't see even, but we are able to see using some visuals and so on. So modeling in biology recently have taken a lot of interest and resources overall. So this is something you can think about. And not just this topic, following 3-4 topics also are something that you can think about as projects. Because we right now don't know when will labs open, when will research begin full-fledged, when you will be able to go to research institute. So you can think about using computers and mathematics to study biological problems as your projects. Another very important field here is called as molecular modeling. So biomolecules are modeled, like proteins and DNA, their structure, their function, what are the domains that they have. The proteins is made up of different domains and different secondary structures. How do protein from a thread-like primary structure folds itself into a three-dimensional structure where it starts functioning, etc. So all this is you can imagine, is very difficult. You can't even see that under microscope. So it's very difficult to visualize and think about. But now with technology, now with directly and indirectly trying to sort of get the structure and the coordinates of a particular protein, we are now able to model that inside a computer using different softwares. So molecular modeling and then its function is something that is also very important. Like I said, now with technology and NMR, crystallography, we now are able to very accurately talk about structure of a particular protein or a biomolecule and anything. But increasing its resolution, making sure that exactly this atom inside the molecule exactly at that position. Because mind you, especially for proteins and enzymes, having a particular conformation like a lock and key is very important for it to function. So getting it right and going in details of a particular single molecule is something computational biomodeling also does using some mathematical and coding softwares. Not just typical structure, but also pathways and processes are also modeled nowadays. So again, I'm going to connect this with bacteria, with microorganisms. where it's relatively easier to study these processes because they are not as complex as higher organisms, humans, and so on. So trying to model these pathways and analyzing them and then extrapolating it to other organisms, if this is happening in bacteria inside using a model, then can we use this model to study a different organism, for example, human, is something that computational biomodeling also does. Again, mind you, this involves mathematics, this involves computer science, this involves statistics, this also involves up to some level biochemistry and biophysics also. So this is really interdisciplinary, and if your interest is interdisciplinary, this is something that you can think about. As I said, interactions and simulations is a major part of visualizing different biomolecules. So that is something that you can do. You can select a molecule of interest. I don't know, for example, insulin, or for example, SARS-CoV outer coat protein, and try to find out what are these structures, how these structures are made, how they develop into what they are. And then if we know that, then at what point of the developing process we can halt it, we can modify it, we can make it less virulent and so on. So not just this, and not just in this particular example or few examples that I've quoted, computational biomodeling can be used in your projects at different levels. So your project may be related to microbiology or may not be. It can be a completely physics oriented, chemistry oriented project. But you can still use computational modeling for hypothesis testing. You can test your hypothesis. You can test your possible guess using model system on your computers, and then take some clues from that and really design experiment in wet labs. Biomodeling will also give you a general insight, right? General new insights into. You might have not thought about it, and unless you do experiment, you can't get it. But if you can do it using simulation, you can then think about new solutions or even new problems. It will deepen it helps in deepening understanding of any process. If you are talking about how a nanoparticle is actually generated, and you can't, it happens so fast that obviously you can't see the process happening, but then you can model it and then try to see what must be happening and so on. Suggesting and interpreting experiments is also very important, especially when your experiments contain lots of data, lots of numbers. Then putting it together and trying to simulate it is also very important. Trying to trace chains of causalities. This is happening because of that. That is happening because of this. So if you are not able to actually have checkpoints in your experiments, in your processes, this is something you can actually model and sort of get back to your actual experiments and model, and see what must be the process, what must be the cause of particular thing happening. This can also go up to very high sensitivity, which perhaps your lab experiments may not. So this is something you have to think about. And this will obviously help integrate different knowledge and different information together when you're making a model. So this is also very interesting. And this can also generate new approaches. You never know when you actually model something and see that happening. But yeah, and in general, having said that, this is a quote by George Box, a very well-known British statistician. So he said once, which is absolutely true, that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So being models, you realize that they may not, most of the time they will not be able to replicate every complex phenomenon happening outside into your model. It's a model, right? So it's not a real thing happening. But certainly it will be useful, and it is useful to think about what must be happening up to some level which you otherwise cannot. So think about models not just in as biomodeling, but think about computational modeling in any of the projects that we will do. Second, very important and currently very relevant subcategory is computational epidemiology. Epidemiology is basically study, spread, control of diseases in a population. So modeling, again, modeling spatiotemporal spread. So spread over time and spread over area of a particular disease is what this particular thing talks about. And again, you can imagine modeling will be very useful where you have, where you design, you create, you use certain mathematical relationships and equations, and very importantly, biostatistics overall, to try to solve this particular disease spread, disease frequency problem using your model, and then try to suggest possible solutions to the real world epidemic that is happening. This is something that is again very interdisciplinary and really something interesting, that you are at one point talking about agents of causing this particular epidemic. So you are talking about bacteria, viruses, whoever, parasites and pathogens, and how they infect, etc. But you are also talking about at a larger population how it is getting spread. So that depends upon n number of parameters. It depends upon how virulent the agent is. It depends upon how fast it can create a particular infection. How it spreads. It spreads through touch. It spreads through coughing droplets. It spreads through water bodies, etc. And then how a person, when in contact with that, gets again infected, what kind of personal immunity that is possible. So these things are something that you can think about in computational epidemiology. uh, Currently what people are doing is real-time epidemiology, that is they are not working on traditional model, but they are actually, while epidemic is happening, they are trying to get lots and lots of data and analyze it and try to think about how this particular spread is happening. So this is very important, and that's why all these fields under bioinformatics and computational biology are very important, because now we are able to generate lots of data. The data that is sent to you through your mobile phone, your smartwatch, the data that is gathered by people around you and researchers, etc. All this data is really tremendous, and the only bottleneck is how we can use this particular data. So nowadays we are actually trying to do real-time epidemiology, where while the epidemic is happening, we are trying to find out reasons and possible solutions to this particular thing. And not just that, not just about the agent and the disease aspect of it, also resource optimization. For example, the epidemic is happening. So can we use computational mathematical model to see how much resource we have and what is the status of the epidemic, and then can we make sure that we have enough vaccines, face masks, right, for example, medicines, etc., which can be distributed, spread over to the growing epidemic population, maintaining or making sure that the disease is not progressed to a really high limit. So this is a practical problem, right? You might be hearing about this around you. So even in computational epidemiology, resource optimization is also a very important field. And now perhaps you can imagine you yourself perhaps trying to do that, trying to help by doing your project. For this, you need not go to a particular wet lab or a research institute. You can do this on your laptop, obviously with help of your teachers and different researchers who work on this field. But here, what you require is majorly data. And once you have the data, it's your brain, your understanding that will help sort of propose some problems to your projects. So these are the four important fields that work together in computational epidemiology, computer science, mathematics, public health, and geographical information science, as you can imagine. Evolutionary biology recently, after incorporation of mathematics to study biology, has developed a lot, where mathematical models are being developed and used to study the process of evolution. Otherwise, it's not possible in real time. So that mainly includes data analysis, different methods, mathematical models, and different simulation techniques that could mimic, that could help us understand how a particular evolutionary process must have happened or will happen. What can be the reasons behind it? What can be the important controlling factors behind it? What kind of interactions must have happened and will happen to give us this particular result? So as you can imagine, this is not possible using real organisms in a short period of time. But you can increase the speed of these interactions if instead of real organisms and interaction, you use numbers and mathematical equations. So there are many examples where we were able to sort of find out the pattern and process of evolution modeling, including our evolution and so on. This is also very much connected with is also very much connected with phylogenetics, that is understanding the relationship over generations of species. You see current species, right? For example, analogy, you see leaves of a tree, but you may not actually see the branches behind it and how the at particular time in the past that branch, how it was and how it was, whether it had leaves, etc., etc. So what you see right now is a complete structure where there are leaves and there are branches and there is a root system. So if you can imagine something similar happening in terms of evolution of particular taxa or particular group of species, what you see are current species. How can you relate that, and how can you understand how particular species, a couple of species or a group of species were connected with a common ancestry in the past? So mathematical modeling and computational biology can help you in understanding this. And nowadays, since we have a lot of data, sequencing data from DNA sequences, whole genomes also. So phylogenetics has developed a lot, and this is something, again, I'm saying, what you require to start with is data, which is available on biological databases for free. So then think about doing that. It requires some understanding of coding of some softwares, some background, but I'm sure if you put your head to it, you will be able to understand that. Another important field is population genetics. How genetics, genes, alleles, their combination, their spread, the gene pool, etc., is happening in a particular population. Again, you cannot go on in real population all the time, collect samples and see what alleles are present, what combinations are present, and so on. But you can do this, you can imagine using computers and models. Not just for a species, you can then think about a particular gene or a particular genome of a species, how it must have evolved from which gene pattern to what gene pattern. What must be the function of a particular gene some time back and now what it is. So here, obviously, you're integrating your genomic data, your biological data with your modeling completely. Like I said, reconstructing history of species and population. You know what is adaptation in natural selection. You know many examples of adaptations. So this is something that you see that a particular plant is adapted to a particular condition, or a particular species is adapted to be a predator of a particular kind for a particular species, etc. So it is also interesting to find out what is the genetic basis of this, whether what genes have played role, whether they have played role in particular adaptations, why those genes are more prominent and not others, why these genes or at least become dominant and these did not, etc. So all this can happen using mathematical modeling. And something again to connect with microbiology, antibiotic resistance associated fitness. So here fitness, you know what it means. Fitness means the ability to survive. Fitness doesn't mean being strong or being very violent or being very toxic, right? Or very defense oriented, but it means you are able to survive in given conditions. So antibiotic resistance associated fitness cost in bacteria is also a very pertinent topic that people are studying in evolutionary biology. So how bacteria develop resistance, what are the features, what are the reasons, genetic as well as environmental, and how can we model that, and how can we see in the past as well as predict in the future what will happen if these species develop and these antibiotics develop and so on. Computational neuroscience is a very advanced and recent field. But again, like I said before, this is only possible to study neurons and their interactions and development of nervous system only because we have data, large amount of data, and we have the processing power nowadays because of the computer science, etc. So you know, like, so speed of neurons, you might be knowing it can be from 50 to 90% of light, speed of light. So these processes happen really fast, and we don't have that technology to actually see this happening. It's very rare and very limited. Uh, so how to study this? How to study the huge variety of neurons and their interaction, synapses types, etc., with the speed at which they happen, right, in real time. So now we can model, we can mimic these things happening using computer modeling, using neural modeling and networks. So what we are able to do now is mimic that behavior of these elements in silico, in our models, and then see how these processes happen, how synapses are made, how they are destroyed, what are the reasons, and so on. But you can also imagine what can be the applications of studying this, right? Obviously, in human health, the disorders of nervous systems, the development of human brain and nervous system. Not just that, the function of brain, the cognitive studies, etc., are also now being predicted and studied more using computational neuroscience. Computer vision is also a new field that is coming out. We understand, so we all are able to see, right? Uh, uh, but actual seeing, so light is coming inside our eyes and it is getting registered, but the processing is actually happening in our brain. So researchers have been interested in it, and now we are able to study the vision using computers and computer systems. Here, we are able to mimic and we are able to synthesize different interactions, and then we are able to actually find how our brains see things, and can we mimic that. If we are able to mimic that, then we are actually developing with the help of some robotics, artificial eyes and their processes and cameras and so on. There are a lot of applications of this, including in machine learning and artificial intelligence. So something like all of you may know Alexa, Siri, right, Google Dot, and so on. So all these are happening because we are trying to mimic learning process, human learning process into machines. And for that, obviously, studying actual brain processes helps. So we also have artificial neural network systems where they try to mimic processes of our neurons and their networking, and try to make sure that the machines are learning, etc. Uh, uh, and one more very important application is studying morphogenesis. So the technology that has been developed for neuroscience, computational neuroscience, etc., can be also used for studying morphogenesis, that is development of particular morphological features in bacterial single cell organisms to complex organisms. And how can we control that? Which are the important points to control, so that we can develop different applications? We can imagine applications of in synthetic biology, that you are actually trying to make parts of tissues or cells while they are growing in your petri plates, fast, and so on. As well as this is something quite futuristic, but this is the beginning of actually studying how can we grow appendages, how can we grow fingers, legs, etc. So this is only possible when we understand what exactly happens inside cells, and how cells develop into tissues and how tissues develop into organs uh, in great details. And now, because of computational neurosciences, we can do that. Another very important and significant field is pharmacology. And now, because we have models, we have visual systems, we have computational networks that can simulate different interactions of drugs and its targets, we are able to use that to develop new drugs as well as identify new targets for the drugs. So in that, what people study, and you can also think about studying, is a particular drug action, how a drug, when inside, actually acts on this target, if there are side effects, and what can be side effects of new drugs. You can actually study that in silico before the drug actually is administered in trials and so on. Identify new drug targets, as I said. So here you are actually modeling different proteins and different targets, and trying to fit your drug to it, and then checking whether the effect is happening or not, whether the change is happening or not, and so on. And not just that, you know the target, and now you are designing different drugs so that it can fit to it and sort of dock, and then try to design these drugs that can be better, efficient, without or with very less side effects. Not just that, methods for repurposing drugs. So we by now have lots of drugs, and lots of research has went on in designing drugs. Some of them are effective, some of them are not really effective. But then, can we use existing drugs, repurpose them, modify them, and then use it as new drug? Using in silico studies is also a very important uh, category under this. So that if you're interested in biochemistry or human physiology, you can think about studying this. And since now we have genomic and proteomic data also, like genome, which is the entire complement, we also have a proteome, which is the entire complement of proteins that could be present, can be produced. So if we have that, can we use that to design new drugs? Can we, not just drug, but strategies of therapy, not just one drug, not just its concentration, but combination of that with less side effects. So this is another field. And like I said, predicting structure and function effects of drugs and targets and overall. And genomics, I've been talking about genomics, I've been giving references about genomics. But let me specifically highlight few things about genomics. So genomics is a very sort of upgraded version of genetics, where in genetics you can talk about one gene or its alleles, etc. In genomics you are going to talk about all set of genes which potentially are present and could be expressed for a particular organism. You can imagine what kind of data and power that data can give you, uh, uh, and then what can be its applications in studying different problems from different fields. So it can be in terms of understanding infectious diseases caused by different bacterial or viral pathogens, which whether even right now, can you decide or can you think about whether this particular person could be more prone to this particular disease or this particular pathogen based on the genetic makeup of a particular individual? Or you can sort of use this data to understand why this particular population is more prone to this and why this population not more prone to this. Obviously, in one go, and these are very deep and very complex projects. But this is something that you can start thinking about contribution and so on. Not just that in terms of application, but understanding basic combination and differences between comparing genomes of different species, trying to find out the relationship between species, trying to find out similarities and differences between species in terms of their genomes, so that it helps you to understand and develop more knowledge about the species that you are interested in. For example, comparing your genome with mice genome or rat's genome or chimpanzee genome or anything, right? So you can try to find out the similarities and overlaps and differences also, and then try to extrapolate. If this is happening in chimps, we can do some experiments in chimps or rats, etc. And if this is happening in rats, then what could happen in humans, and can use that and so on. You can also, since you have that data, you can also try to connect genes with behavior, genotype with phenotype overall, and try to develop a profile of the species or the organism of your interest. Genomics has also been used and now been studied to develop superior traits in plants and animals. Plants to be more strong and more fit in drought conditions, in high salt soils, etc. Animals to produce more meat or perhaps milk with some antibodies and some vaccines, etc. This has been possible because we know the entire set of genes that are present, and we exactly know what we can change and we cannot change and so on. Synthetic biology I talked about. So certainly understanding genome and modifying it to produce synthetic cells, right? Craig Venter Institute is able to produce one very basic cell. So this is the beginning, right? And the beginning is from our understanding of genome. You can think about that. Not just that, epigenome. So epigenetics is a field where you sort of try and understand this gene when expressed produces this particular protein. So you connect one gene with what protein, etc. But now we realize many things happens in this process and after that also, which you cannot see, which you cannot get that information from only studying genes. So that's why it is epi, above a particular genome. So epigenome is a new field where you are not just studying one single gene, but you are studying entire set of genes and then trying to find out if this is the blueprint, what is happening in between, so that we are getting this product. So that is epigenomics. Interestingly, psychogenomics is also another field that is coming up, where doctors and researchers are trying to find out relationship between your psychological traits, your decision making, your behavior, with the type of combination of genes that we have. One major application is in addiction, in controlling addiction. Why some people are more prone to addiction, why some are not, and if they are prone to this particular addiction, can we predetermine that? Can we think about that? Can we use certain strategies to limit that and so on? And this is very important, that is conservation genomics, conservation of different species, different populations using their genomic understanding. What kind of gene combination is present in a particular population? What kind of gene pool is present? Based on that particular gene pool, can you think about strategies in terms of increasing the population size of a particular species, let's say a bear tiger, a bear lion, can we mate this population with this population so that their genomes are compatible? Can we use this to improve conservation efforts so that we understand this particular species or this particular population of a species is resistant to this disease but prone to this disease? Then can we control this based on the genomic information, etc.? So this is a very good application, conservation biology also of genomes. Um, so let me quickly sort of give you some pointers in terms of thinking about your project, executing your projects. So something that you should keep in mind is scientific inquiry. We call it as research, but think about it as scientific inquiry. You are inquiring. You need to think about a variety and complex problems to start with. It will be very rare if you start with one problem and you are able to finish it. Keep in mind some related problems together. Do literature review. Do lots of reading. It will help you a lot. Many research journals and websites provide free information. So do that through your schools, through research institutes. You can collaborate and try to get more information. Think about problem solving approaches. It's very rare that only one approach will give you results. You have to think about many similar approaches together. Then do very accurate, very fine controlled experiments. Be very accurate with your results and understanding of that results. Conclude based on your results and not on your intuition that you want particular thing to happen. You think it happened, you may not think it happened, but the facts will remain facts. So follow the facts and your results. Think about that. Certainly subject your research, your experiment to peer evaluation. Talk to your teachers, talk to your colleagues, share your information, share your data with researchers, try to get their input, see where you are going, how you are going. So this involves planning, and I'm sure your teachers and your parents, your friends will help you overall in that. And if this happens the way you have thought about, then perhaps you are able to contribute to scientific research. But importantly, this should not be your aim. Your aim should be enjoying the process particularly. And if you enjoy the process, I'm sure you'll be able to contribute to the scientific community through your project and through your results and so on. So just to extend this, give problem more importance than tools. Think about a problem and then think about tools. Think about simple problems. It's actually difficult to think about simple problems. That will have simple solutions. It's rare, but when that happens, it's brilliant. So be very selective, very thoughtful about the problem and its real relevance. Don't be afraid to ask questions to anybody. That is how we progress. Don't be scared to make mistakes. If you do make mistakes, learn from them. Please don't make the same mistake again. Collaborate with any number of people. It's a community endeavor, the research and the science overall. So think about that. Learn from each other. Share things. And like I said, enjoy the process. So thanks a lot. Over to you. I'll stop my presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Oti. This has been a very detailed discussion and a very detailed interaction that you had with the students. I can see a number of questions in the chat. And so I'll request my colleagues Ishita and Shrey to take over and call out the questions and moderate the session, the question answer session. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Oti.
Yeah, so I'm having a bit of bandwidth issues, so I've closed my video, but I'm here.
Right, no problem, sir. If questions which are there in the chat, we will take those one by one. We will take those questions one by one.
So the first question that we have is from Parth Sarda. who writes, "Dear Sir, can you please explain the mechanism of CAS9 and CRY-SPR and gene editing? And how can they be used in the treatment of diseases and even in evolution?" The second part to his question is, how are plasmid the cause for antibiotic resistance in bacteria and how do they function?
Okay. I'll first talk about CRISPR. I'll talk about it briefly because the process is a bit complex. But anyways, the mechanism is, remember I talked about endonucleases, where these proteins are produced by bacteria. They recognize alien DNA molecule, let's say viral genome, which is inserted into the bacterial cytoplasm, and then the protein catch hold of it. So how does these protein know that which is their DNA and which is not their DNA, right? So these proteins are able to actually recognize certain stretches of sequences as their target sites. And when they catch hold of that, they start cutting the molecule. Now, in case of CRISPR-Cas, basically, CRISPR stands for Cluster Regulatory Interspace Short Palindromic Repeats. Basically, it means that it's a cluster of regulatory sequences, regulatory repeats, which are palindromic, right? Which means the sequences are like mirror images. If you put a mirror in between, they are mirror images. Like we say Dalda, right? So you can read Dalda from one end as well as another end. It's still, you'll hear Dalda. So these are palindromic sequences. What happens is, this particular CRISPR with its Cas, CRISPR associated proteins, has an RNA molecule within it. So this RNA molecule is bound to particular CRISPR, and this RNA molecule is known to recognize its complementary sequences, right, in different parts of genome. So since we know that, we can actually uh, talk about designing and getting exact RNA molecules that we want inside the CRISPR and Cas, and then that can be used to recognize different sequences in different parts of the genome. If they go there and attach, at that point the gene or particular sequence can break. Right? When it breaks, it is open. Now, once it is open, your gene of interest through, I don't know, the many vectors or even Cas system also, you can insert your gene of interest into that position. So not only you are able to specifically cut a portion of DNA using CRISPR-Cas system, you're also able to insert something that is of your interest. So this is how editing happens in a very simple manner. For his second question about plasmids, so plasmids are smaller ring circular molecules, right? Which don't have all the genes that the main genome will have, but it has genes which are important. You see, all this depends upon how a particular plasmid will increase the fitness of a particular bacteria if it has it. So plasmids have certain genes that code for certain proteins that can degrade antibiotic molecules. Okay? So this happens. So these are extra chromosomal, meaning they are outside the genome, but they are still inside the cell. So when the cell is exposed to antibiotic, these compounds can be generated and they can degrade antibiotics. Importantly, not just that, the plasmids are also vectors. I mean, they can get transformed from one bacterial cell to another. So this is like they're exchanging their tools, right? So there are species-specific plasmids, and there are specific plasmids which have specific genes that code for proteins that can degrade particular antibiotic. There are some plasmids which are now man-made also, where we have 2-3 different antibiotic resistant genes which are inserted into the plasmid that we use for different functions, etc. So that is how basically plasmids that encode genes for proteins that can degrade antibiotics work. Hello?
Yes, sir. The next question is from, this is one for the IRIS team. This is regards the registrations opening. Chintu Sen asks, when will the registrations open?
So Chintu, you will be informed via email and over the IRIS social media and on the IRIS website. So keep an eye out for that. We are not providing any date as of now because the dates will be announced on the IRIS website and in an email to all of those who have registered for the webinars as well.
The next question is from Usha Tripathi. She writes, "Hi sir, how to select software tools to understand mutation in any specific virus and its spread over region wise? A process to study mutation in any virus in silico and their study region wise."
Okay, so the first part is there are a lot of software packages available online through which you can procure available sequences, you can edit them, you can see, you can make some changes in silico, etc. Perhaps I'll share some list of different databases that your participants can go through. Second was region wise, right? So this is the core of epidemiology. So you are not only talking about which agent and how it is getting infected, but you are also talking about, are there any geographical environmental conditions that are affecting its spread. So this is where you have to combine different sets of data, one that is coming from the biological aspect of disease and another that is coming from the either socio-economical or geographical aspect of a particular population. So sometimes there are different agencies, governmental, non-governmental, like NIV is there or WHO is there, which provide this basic data. So if you're interested in actually getting the data, you can go to these sites and you can download this data. Uh, uh, One another thing is you can collaborate with certain research institutes which have permission to collect such data, because you can imagine this is very sensitive and there are ethical issues involved in this. So to work with a clear, everybody should understand this very clearly. One is to work with pathogens and viruses and so on. You require absolute training and permissions from the research institutes and labs, etc. Second is to collect survey and to collect data from populations, people, etc. You require, you need to check ethical issues, right? So every research institute in India and outside also have their institutional ethics committees. So these ethics committee actually have meetings. You discuss what you're going to do. They suggest things, and based on that, once you get the permission, you can collect the data, right? So that's why I'm explaining this one for the biosafety reason, and second is collaboration is important in such case if you really want to get the actual data about the disease from particular populations. So this is something you have to think about if you want to get particular data. Once you get the data, you can find out, you can identify different variables and parameters that will uh, will help you understand which of them are actually affecting a particular population. When you compare population from another area which perhaps doesn't have this disease or has disease in a very low amounts and so on. So when you compare such data, you'll come to know what can be potential factors, and then you can go ahead and model these things, right? Once you identify these factors or potential factors, you can actually model, you can actually run real-time experiments in silico to see whether these factors are affecting really. So you can predict, you can have an hypothesis, right? If this factor is increased to this level, my population will have this disease up to this level, something like that. So if you can model and execute these experiments through your model, you will come to know exact reasons and the basically phenomenon behind this spread.
Thank you, sir. The other question we have is from Anu Patnaik. He's asking, since MDR diseases are resistant to some drugs, so are they curable? If yes, then how are they curable?
Okay. So MDR is basically multiple drug resistant strains or pathogens, bacteria. The main reason, in very simple terms, we have these bacteria is we have been using antibiotics without really thinking of their effects and side effects. Meaning, like the way in which natural bacterial population will evolve is naturally you can have some mutants that are resistant to different antibiotic, right? Majorly, so if you're talking about some common antibiotic, right? So that antibiotic, when if you give it to a particular patient or you do experiment in lab, so in flask you grow cells and you put your antibiotic, obviously majority of the cells will die because they are sensitive to it. But through random mutations or through transfer of plasmids with resistant gene, some strain can get resistance to this particular antibiotic. If that is the case, then that strain is not going to die and it will increase, right? But what you have done over time is you have killed all the sensitive ones, so which remains are the only resistant ones. And that is how basically the multiple drug resistant phenomenon starts. So currently we have quite a bit of pathogens which are multiple drug resistance. One way to treat that is try to uh, combine different antibiotics and develop a strategy to use it. Another is try to find new targets and new drugs and new antibiotics to tackle this, or try to go for natural therapies. And so Ayurveda is now coming up and helping with these particular examples. But it's not very straightforward and easy to cure if you get infection from MDR strains.
Thank you, sir. The next question, sir, we have from Dr. Yogendra Kumar Kothari. He's asking, can homeopathic medicine affect the action of neurons? Then and how?
Okay, I'm sorry, I won't be able to answer this. I don't have expertise in this or knowledge in this. I sorry,
No problem, no problem, sir. Do we have any further questions from the participants? Because we have taken a lot of time of Dr. Ati today, and I would like to close after taking last question.
So I think there's one more question from Tanisha Rathi. She asks, how does bioluminescence screening work?
Okay. There are different modes and different types of bioluminescence and assays. I'll explain what I mentioned before. There are many organisms in aquatic systems or in terrestrial systems which are known to possess bioluminescence, that is production of light through biological processes. You know some jellyfish, you know some fungi, you know of fireflies, right? So we were able to isolate these genes which are responsible for producing fluorescent proteins and clone them and use them through vectors to insert it into different bacteria or any other organism. So what happens is, you know what are plasmids now. So in the plasmid, you can incorporate this fluorescent gene, and next to it, you can incorporate the gene of your interest, right? So it's not always easy and straightforward that when you design certain vector with your gene of interest, it works as fine, right? Many times these are not expressed. The host system in which you have integrated it will resist it or will not function correctly. So then how do you know your gene of interest is actually active? So for that, you have to make sure that the product of the gene you are able to see, right? And if you're doing this in hundreds of mice or bacterial isolates, etc., it's very time consuming and very difficult. So what happens is, if you have the fluorescent gene next to your gene of interest, and if the fluorescent gene protein is produced, which is next to your gene of interest, which means your gene is also getting expressed. So this happens because there is something called as a promoter region in the gene. So where different enzymes and different proteins bind and they start expressing. So that promoter is present with the fluorescent gene and not the gene of your interest, for example. So it's like going hand in hand with the fluorescent protein. If the fluorescent protein is getting expressed, you also know your genome interest is also getting expressed because it is using the same promoter. So since it is fluorescent, you can put it under microscope or put it under ultraviolet or exciting light, and then you can see those bacterial cells or even mice, etc. These cells in which your protein is getting expressed fluoresce green, blue, red, etc. So this is how it happens in short.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, sure.
And on this note, I would like to close the session, end this session, and would like to thank Dr. Asim Auty for his valuable time. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.
We would like to be in touch of you with questions. So if we, as soon as we get questions from more questions from participants, we will be in touch. Participants, thank you so much for joining for today's session. You can contact us for your queries. You can email us with your questions, and your questions can be shared with respective mentors or subject experts. You can send email us to contact@irisnationalfair.org. The recording of these subject sessions are available on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. Please visit www.irisnationalfair.org and keep following us on the Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice day. Stay safe. Bye-bye.